presenting our speaker today, Ivan Brehm. He is the chef owner of one-Michelin-starred restaurant Nouri and the creative in this disciplinary space Appetite. He's recognized for developing a system of thought of cooking, of which cooking is a part, called Crossroads Thinking. Nouri was created from the conviction that no food culture exists in isolation. By cooking food rooted in research, the restaurant creates dishes that are universally delicious, exploring our shared history and a future of respect and diversity. Beyond concepts, philosophies, or types of cuisines, Nouri is a place that celebrates people in all our differences and similarities. A floor above sits Appetite, open 2020. It's a creative space that brings together an R&D kitchen, art gallery, and record bar to create a new kind of community across boundaries. Appetite's mandate is to explore intimate appreciations of these creative forms of expression and promote transdisciplinary with thorough research, food, and meaningful experiences. So without much further ado, Ivan, the floor is yours.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. Just a quick raise of hands of folk that have been to Nouri or Appetite. Should I stand there? Sounds good. Did I get? I'm so sorry. Cool. Where have all the rest of you been? Well, thanks for inviting me. We have a pretty awesome presentation ahead, but I also understand that a lot of you might have been here for the original part of the Crossroad conversation. Hopefully both of those can merge at the end of the talk. I think they will. As discussed earlier, I'm the head chef and owner of both Nouri and Appetite. Nouri comes from the Latin root word for nourishment. It's also a word that's pretty special in other languages. In Korean means globe. In Arabic, Aramaic, and Farsi, there's things related to light, spark, fire, things like that. In Japanese, it means an epiphany or like connecting dots, or at least the roots for those two kanji words means that. So it's really apt word for Nouri. And Appetite obviously means appetite, but for several things. So we are very curious and quite hungry about everything that we do, hence the space on the second floor. Appetite was born as a research center for Restaurant Nouri when we first started. Oh, thank you. Do I point it here? Super. There you go. Crossroads Thinking, understanding diversity through a search for meaning. And there we go. All right. Food is a really good way for us to understand each other, but also to understand Crossroads. We can talk about Crossroads metaphorically, or we can talk about Crossroads quite specifically. We've all seen this, right? We use food as a marker to define who we are, but also to define who the other is, right? People that eat differently from us are not us. And we use those things to kind of navigate and map our way around the world. Edomai sushi is something that everybody understands as a very quintessentially Japanese little product, right? But the history of this dish helps us understand the history of everybody who's here, a very diverse expression of people, everybody from different parts of the world, everybody seemingly quite different, right? Believing in different things, wearing different clothes, eating different foods, and yet, is there something there that links people together? Edomai sushi is a pretty new invention. There's not a lot of time there, about 100 plus years, maybe 200 years worth of its development. At some point in time, with the birth of a middle class, people started to realize food needed to be quick and easy to eat. So what did they do? With fresh fish now readily available because roads were safer. Japan was a pretty kind of crazy place at the time. But now the roads were safer. People had some disposable cash so they didn't have to eat at home. And so these little stalls started to set up selling food on the street. One person thought it was a great idea to revamp the dish, slice some fresh fish, put it on top of soured rice, and give it to people to eat. And this is Edomai sushi. Edo now being essentially where the capital of Japan is, Tokyo, right? This process is used today to communicate what Japan is in food, right? We know Japanese restaurants, we love Japanese food. Oh, come on, clicker. Edamame sushi is the evolution of a process that started maybe 200 years before that called batera sushi. Batera sushi is kind of similar except it's pressed. It's almost like an industrialized way of making dishes, okay? People would just have a frame, pack some rice in there, layer fish on top, traditionally pickled fish, press that, and then cut it, and then voila, you had about 30 sushis done. Very easy way to make food, very easy to dish it out. That's batera sushi, the first version of edamame sushi. Also very Japanese. This batera sushi we just saw is the result of an evolutionary process called nara sushi. Nara translates to old or mature. Sushi, sour rice. So mature sour rice. So far so good? Yes. That's the preservation technique where people would just bury, this time lake fish, freshwater fish, in salt and rice and allow that to ferment and pickle over time. Sometimes upwards of 100 years. You can actually now go to Japan and have a nice bowl of nara sushi that's about 100 years old. Slightly funky, a little pungent, acidic, slightly sweet because of the fermentation process, definitely very savory. All the good tastes that we associate with edamame sushi in a very refined form are here found in a really coarse form, right? That preservation technique is absolutely beautiful and very much a product of Japan, except where's rice from? Not Japanese. Where is Buddhism from? Not from Japan. Where is tea and lacquer? Not Japanese either. You're going too fast there. Can I ask you to move? That would be awesome. Thank you. I don't mean move from here. I need you. Yeah, there we go. So, nara sushi as a process got imported into Japan. Any Malaysians here? Cool. Have you ever had pekasam? Pekasam is literally nara sushi, fish that is buried in rice and salt, traditionally in actual holes on the ground so they could preserve for a long period of time, or mason jars, and then you just eat it throughout the year. The birth of nara sushi in Japan, and ultimately edamame sushi, has its roots right here, not at Mandala, but in Southeast Asia, in Southeast China, where rice is from. It's a pretty fascinating story about how that moved, but actually, if you were to follow the path of rice, you'd get nara sushi pretty much everywhere that rice went. And so, back please. All of those processes from bagong in the Philippines to fak, I didn't say fuck, okay? Which is, I love it because it always works this way. It's perfect, okay? I did, there you go. All of these processes, faks in Cambodian food traditions, all of these processes would have essentially been dotted their way through until we eventually reached Japan. It's quite fascinating, but the same happened with all of those cultural artifacts you see on the site. Next slide. This is our version of a traditional nara sushi. We start with fermented rice. Nara sushi would have been fermented. A fermented rice cake. Actually, it's an idli. Idli is not Indian, by the way, for all our Indian friends. Idli starts in Indonesia. And then here, a little fermented fish paste, some Southeast Asian pickles, and a pickled sardine on top. This is known as toro iwashi, a very traditional fatty sardine that comes from that part of the world. Next slide. Hold that thought for everything we talked about. This is gravlax, a pretty cool process for preservation developed by a completely different part of people in a different part of the world. I call them Scandies, just to be a little offensive because they have it easy. Gravlax, grave salmon. That's literally what that means, because fish would be either wrapped in birch bark or in berries of some form of grain, traditionally barley and things of the sort, buried with salt, and then allowed to ferment and preserve and pickle, okay? Sometimes, if you move up to Finland, this little mash of now fish preserved in some form of starch, carbohydrate-led fermentation is what people call when they want to be fancy, would be baked and literally just eaten baked after the preservation technique. So you could literally, without a fridge, take fresh fish, blah, 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 and then at some point in time bake it or eat it as it was, okay? The process of fermentation would result in something sweet, something a little savory and umami, something acidic with a little bit of funk. Sometimes aromatized by other things like fresh herbs and things of the sort. That's a very ancient technique that's about 600, 700 years old. That technique evolves, funny enough, with the birth of a middle class around about the same time as sushi evolves in a completely different part of the world to, one back. No, two back. Yeah, thank you. To this. If you ever had a lox smorgasbord or a little open-faced sandwich, it's pretty interesting, but when you think about all the ingredients that are in an edamame sushi that started in our sushi, the fermented rice, the pungency, and all the taste profiles that come as a result of fermentation and ultimately lead to edamame sushi being such a pristine, iconic, beautiful little dish that you can make little funny icons, t-shirts, tattoos about, are also found in this dish, completely different part of the world. The rye that was used to actually ferment the fish, carbohydrate-led fermentation, is now in bread. The pungency is now in a horseradish, aka wasabi for white people. Yeah. And then a fresher slice of fish that now doesn't have to be preserved for a long period of time is just lightly smoked and sliced and popped on top of this. Sushi is a smorgasbord. Now, when you think about it, different parts of the world, different expressions, t-shirts, belief systems, yada, 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 and yet, without ever crossing paths, we develop similar techniques for preservation. Yeah? So crossroads physically there, it didn't exist. Where is the crossroad, right? If we were to move to the next slide, I just picked some dishes, but this is true for pretty much everything that we know as food today. And for me, it's very fascinating because when you stop to think about it, it's way more significant than we give this credit to, okay? There isn't really a spontaneously creative, specific, exclusive dish of a particular culture that exists in isolation. The one you can talk about probably is just throwing some meat in water and boiling that up. Very primitive forms of cooking perhaps are very specific to parts of the world, and yet we do the same thing in all parts of the world primitively, right? We all throw stuff in water and on fire and then eat it, right? Where's the crossroad there? I have flatbreads and pizzas and uttapams and tostadas, different ingredients, maybe because the circumstances are different, right? Maybe I don't have a particular type of grain here, I use another one, but the impulse to put some tasty stuff on top of flatbread remains the same, right? Maybe no cheese, and yet a little lactic fermentation is present. It's pretty funny. And here are the very primitive boiled meats dishes that we've developed across the world. It's no real coincidence that pot au feu and pho sound the same, okay? Ceviches, anybody like them? Yeah, everybody talks about it. Just like edamame sushi, ceviche is a South American thing that probably comes from Peru. Well, Venezuelans would hate you for it, but who cares? Except we've been eating ceviches in this part of the world before there was even a knowledge about that part of the world. Actually, some people theorize ceviches came from here, Australasia in general, and moved across the Pacific for 2,000 years. That process was lengthy. They arrived in the coast of South America, brought back in a process that took 1,000 years, sweet potato to this part of the world. So there are varieties of sweet potato found in Indonesia. Kumara sweet potato, all the health freaks know that one. So that sweet potato comes from South America. It was lost in South America and now is only found in places like Indonesia and Malaysia. And that before any European ever touched Asia. Funny, but we've been talking, right? Next slide, please. So these are dishes that we would do at Nouri using this knowledge. The idea is to use both the scholastic, kind of anthropological, historical bit of information, but also our experience eating and trying foods from around the world to put something that is truly kind of unique. At that crossroad there of knowledge and experience, we're able to create something that is new. And to be honest, I think creativity in that sense is very much not just the ego-driven, let's make something that didn't exist before, but the act of discovering these little links that are there. Some of these links are historical. Some of these links are very much biological. Sweet and sour, crunch, umami. Why do we like it, right? Evolutionary, there is a reason why those things are preferences for us. When you see a bowl with oozing egg yolk there, it sounds delicious, right? But there's something deeply hardwired inside of you that makes you want to crave that. It's not just an accident. Otherwise, McDonald's logos wouldn't be red and yellow, and the bow wouldn't use in the commercial. Those things are playing at a very primal kind of part of who you are. And that part is shared. And so, in the context of all of these weird diversities, different forms of expression, it's very easy to see difference face to face, but you backtrack maybe 2 steps, and then 3 steps, and then 4 steps, and then we're talking about a pretty universal code there that we use and apply that code to the different circumstances of our environment to create diversity. So difference is really only difference up front. Essentially, we're playing up at the same code, responding to code all the time. That's what food is, but that's also who we are, right? And we forget those things sometimes. Let's click things like mandu, manta, sounds a lot the same. Manto, it's no accident. This is, next dish please, how we interpret that dish at the restaurant. The idea is to highlight not the difference there, but the actual similarities. So the dishes that we make are consistent touch points on what Crossroads is. How much time do I have? Okay, perfect. And so when we start talking about code, I think it's important to remember that code can also be rewritten. And here perhaps is where the conversations start to make sense. Okay, this conversation about a development personal bit and where our food is from bit. The only factor is where is your knowledge and how much light are you putting in things. It's easy to forget that every time you are at Crossroads and you have to make a decision about where to go, like the people before us did with food, that if you're not aware and paying attention, it's very easy to get stuck, right? But when you're responding aware to your environment, it's very easy to make decisions that don't feel like decisions. When you're stuck and you have to make a decision between left and right, I always like to remember that there is mourning in those decisions. A part of you dies when you decide to go left, right? But if it feels natural and it's in accordance with something you believe in, that is part of you, that is codified, then perhaps there is no death. It's very smooth transition. Nobody asked the great-grandmother why when she didn't have tamarind, she used green tomatoes instead, a fruit that she wouldn't have seen before. You know, imagine how chili went viral, like so fast. People didn't have to deliberate so much. They used what was around them and had a much more pragmatic relationship with the future. And so I think the way that food evolves and the way that we can perhaps kind of resolve those conversations about Crossroads lie really in just paying attention. I think at the very least, people weren't thinking about the future culturally when they were making food for right now, right? They weren't thinking about their legacy and recipes when they were making food for right now. And that's why pizza was born. And that's why manta was born. They were actually contending with the practical realities of the environment without considering 7 steps down the line. But we, so attached to our phones and technologies and kind of mirrors, I guess, images, are consistently pushing that forward, right? What is that going to represent 7 steps down the line? Will I succeed in that conversation? But life happens right here, right? And I think provided we cook like that, we'll keep inventing food that's really delicious and will stand the test of time in the future. But if we're too preoccupied with the future, we might just miss the turn in that crossroad. And I think there is a parallel there that cannot be missed. That's the presentation. Questions?